They say family is everything. But what if the very people meant to protect you were the ones who taught you to doubt your memory, betray your needs, and perform love like a survival ritual? In narcissistic families, the house may look normal, but the rules are invisible, the punishments are emotional, and the love is conditional. You're not overreacting. You're waking up. And Machiavelli would agree. Escaping a rigged empire starts with recognizing the throne was never built for you. This isn't about healing, it's about strategy. You were born into a system long before you had the words to describe it. A place where silence was rewarded, obedience was praised, and love had strings attached. In a narcissistic family, hierarchy hides behind holiday photos. There's always someone at the top, the admired, the feared, the one who decides who is loved and who is punished. And then there are the roles handed down like heirlooms. The one who always sacrifices, the one who is never enough, the one who must never outshine. These are not accidental dynamics. They are strategies of control passed off as tradition. You may have tried to earn affection through perfection grades, achievements, politeness. But no amount of excellence can buy peace in a family that needs a scapegoat. The rules are always changing. You're praised on Monday, humiliated by Thursday. One sibling is golden, the other ignored. Boundaries are mocked. Privacy is disrespected. And if you dare to speak truth, they'll say you're dramatic, ungrateful, too sensitive. Because in this empire, perception is everything, and if they can make you doubt your memory, they win without ever raising their voice. This is the quiet warfare of narcissistic families. Control without evidence, shame without bruises. You begin to censor yourself before they even speak. But Machiavelli understood something vital. The most dangerous place to live is in a kingdom where love is conditional and power is invisible. You were trained to stay small, to be useful, to never question why affection felt like a test. But there is no peace inside a prison, even one that shares your last name. You do not owe your silence to the people who broke you and called it love. To break free, you must stop asking for permission. You must see the system for what it is, an empire that never intended for you to rule, only to serve. And the first betrayal you must commit is loyalty to yourself, because survival is not disloyalty, it is strategy. And from this point on, you're not looking for their approval. You're building your own crown, quietly, ruthlessly, permanently. You were taught obedience as a virtue and curiosity as trouble. From the earliest memory, lessons were not gentle conversations, but invisible curricula. Do not ask, do not contradict, do not make the family look messy. Rules arrived through sighs, plate slams, and quiet jokes that taught you to shrink. You learned to perform gratitude while erasing the edges of your own wants. You became fluent in reading moods instead of naming needs, fluent in apologizing before the offense was named. Parents and siblings became instructors of compliance, rewriting your instincts. When you learned to speak, you discovered your words could be used as evidence against you. Tell the truth and you are dramatic. Plead and you are selfish. Leave and you are cruel. The curriculum keeps you off balance, so you cannot form an inner policy that contradicts the family line. Identity flattens into roles. The peacemaker, the problem child, the golden child labels that feel like personal failure rather than assignments designed to preserve the household hierarchy. Living inside that training camp erodes the muscle of autonomy. You stop making choices because choices provoke interrogation. You hide achievements because success becomes a threat to the fragile equilibrium. You measure every victory by whether it annoyed them. If it did, you call it a mistake. freedom becomes a theory, not a practice. The most subtle violence is the theft of your narrative. They retell your life so often, you begin to believe their version more than your own memory. Machiavelli would say, observe the architecture of this conditioning without begging for mercy. Map the incentives that keep you obedient: shame, withholding, the promise of belonging, and name them until they lose their glamour. Naming is the first act of power, because once a mechanism is visible, it can be refused. Refusal is not theatrical, it is administrative. Practice it in small acts. Keep 1 hour private. Refuse to justify a decision. Reclaim an evening for yourself. Those tiny refusals are training sessions for a different life. Unlearning the rituals that kept you alive there is slow and deliberate. It requires patience, because every habit of small obedience once protected you from chaos. Reclaiming autonomy is not rebellion for spectacle. It is a sequence of careful edits to how you spend your days and who has access to your headlines. Teach yourself the vocabulary of boundaries. Test the water with a single change and record the result. The point is not to punish them. The point is to train yourself to choose yourself. You were not born to be obedient. You were taught to be useful. The work now is to unteach usefulness as identity and to rehearse being whole on your own terms. Each small experiment in self-possession is a lesson in power, practical, private, and irreversible if you keep practicing. Start with 1 guarded hour and let it spread into a life that cannot be farmed by someone else's appetite. Keep a quiet journal of each change and protect those pages as treasure. You didn't choose the role, it was given to you like a costume at birth. Maybe you were the one they blamed when the room went silent, or the one they paraded to guests while whispering your flaws behind closed doors. Maybe you were the one who kept the peace, smoothing over rage with a smile stitched from fear. Narcissistic families don't operate on love, they operate on function. And everyone in the system is cast like a character in a play they never auditioned for. The golden child learns to shine on cue, their worth dependent on performance. The scapegoat learns to absorb the family's rot, wearing shame that doesn't belong to them. The invisible child learns not to ask, not to need, not to speak. These roles aren't random. They're survival strategies for the narcissist in charge, who needs everyone positioned to serve their image. You weren't nurtured, you were positioned. And every time you stepped out of that role, punishment followed. Emotional withdrawal, sudden rage, cold smiles, subtle sabotage. They call it family, but it's closer to theatre, scripted, rehearsed, and merciless if you forget your lines. But what they never taught you is that the role only works if you play it. The moment you stop performing, the script begins to collapse. That's why they panic when you change, not because you're wrong, but because you're unpredictable. And unpredictability is dangerous to a narcissist who built their throne on control. Machiavelli knew the threat of unpredictability. He knew that the most dangerous person in any kingdom is the one who no longer accepts the role they were given. To break free, you must betray the script, quietly, strategically, not with shouting but with subtraction. Subtract the explanations, subtract the confessions, subtract the need for their applause. Do not announce your transformation, become it. Begin by refusing to play the part. If you were the fixer, stop fixing. If you were the listener, go silent. If you were the responsible one, let them feel the weight of their own chaos. You do not need to justify this shift. Justification is still performance. They trained you to feel guilty for becoming someone they can't control. Wear that guilt like armor. Let it harden until it becomes indifference. This isn't rebellion, it's clarity. It's the cold discipline of no longer feeding a system that feasted on your confusion. The role they gave you was never who you are. It was who they needed you to be so they could stay broken without consequence. Burn the script, walk off the stage. You do not owe them a final act. Do not argue with the family narrative, not because they're right, but because they never needed truth to win. In a narcissistic family, the story is sacred, and anyone who questions it becomes the villain. You could present every receipt, every contradiction, every timeline, and they would still twist the frame to paint you as unstable, ungrateful, or cruel. Because it was never about truth. It was about control. The family narrative is a fortress built from selective memory, denial, and performance. It protects the narcissist and blames the one who sees too clearly. You might try to clarify, to explain what really happened, hoping that if they could just understand, something would shift. But Machiavelli would warn you, truth in a corrupt system is not a weapon, it's bait. They will let you speak only to sharpen their knives. Your honesty becomes ammunition. Your pain becomes entertainment. And worst of all, your clarity becomes the proof that you're difficult. The moment you try to argue, you've already lost. Because in their game, defending yourself is seen as aggression. That's how the trap is set. You react, they perform innocence. You cry, they shrug. You walk away, and suddenly you're the one who left the family behind. The more you try to prove what happened, the more they deny it happened at all. And in that denial, your identity erodes. You begin to doubt your own memory, soften your story, shrink your voice until silence seems safer than truth. That silence is what they want. But silence is only powerful when it's chosen, not forced. So choose a different silence, one that isn't surrender, but strategy. Refuse to participate in their courtroom. Refuse to cross-examine your own reality. Let them talk. Let them gossip. Let them build their version of events. While they're performing, you're planning. While they're rewriting history, you're building distance. The people who matter will see through the illusion, and the ones who don't, you never owed them proof. In the Machiavellian sense, power comes from mastering perception, not from begging for understanding. Your strength is not in how well you explain, it's in how calmly you disengage. Speak your truth once, clearly, without emotion, and then walk away like a sovereign who does not need the crowd's applause. Let them call you cold. Let them call you distant. They called you worse when you were still begging to be heard. Protect your peace like it's the only thing they can't rewrite, because it is. And one day, the silence they forced on you will echo back as the sound of your freedom. In a narcissistic family, your emotions were never yours. They were public property watched, judged, mocked, manipulated. Joy was suspicious. Anger was dangerous. Sadness was inconvenient unless it made someone else look like the savior. You learned early that your feelings had to be edited, rewritten, hidden in rooms no one could enter. You may have cried silently, smiled when terrified, apologized when wounded. This wasn't weakness, it was survival. They trained you to abandon your inner world, to prioritize their comfort over your reality. And every time you handed them access to your feelings, they used it as leverage. They'd push you just far enough to break you, then accuse you of being too sensitive. They'd demand your vulnerability, then punish you for being honest. So you started keeping secrets from yourself. You swallowed emotion like poison disguised as peace. But Machiavelli would not advise you to scream louder or demand empathy from those who cannot feel it. He would tell you to retreat inward, not to collapse, but to fortify. Make your emotions private property, not hidden out of shame, but protected out of strategy. Not everything you feel needs to be shared, especially not with people who weaponize it. Learn to sit with anger without broadcasting it. Learn to cry without witnesses. Learn to feel joy without needing applause. The less predictable your emotions become, the more powerful your presence. That is the beginning of psychological sovereignty. In this kind of family, unpredictability is power. They cannot provoke what they cannot read. And once your inner world becomes yours again, they can no longer design your behavior. This isn't about becoming cold, it's about becoming contained. You are not a performance. You are not a mirror for their ego. Your emotions are sacred signals, not tools for their script. Start reclaiming them by noticing when you hand them over. Every time you explain your reaction to justify yourself, pause. Every time you downplay your discomfort to avoid their mood, pause. Every time you edit your joy so they don't feel threatened, pause. And in that pause, remind yourself, this is mine. This emotion, this moment, this breath, it belongs to no one but me. Let them wonder what you're feeling. Let them guess. The more they guess, the more control slips from their hands. They don't need to know what moves you, only that you are moved by something beyond their reach. That is the beginning of your emotional freedom. That is how you become untouchable. Not because you feel less, but because you finally feel for yourself. They will say you've changed. They'll say you're distant now, cold, unreachable. But what they really mean is this: you are no longer standing where they can use you. In a narcissistic family, closeness is not connection, it's surveillance. Every visit is an inspection, every conversation a trap, every silence a test. You're expected to show up, to smile, to perform the part they wrote for you long before you had a voice. And if you don't, you're punished. Not always with shouting, sometimes with a sigh, a quiet dig, a story about how you've drifted. But that guilt is a leash, and the moment you stop reacting to it, you become free. Distance in this world is not cruelty, it's strategy. It's not about shutting down your heart, it's about protecting it from being farmed for someone else's drama. You can still love them, you can still care, but you do it from far enough away that their chaos doesn't drown you. You stop answering every call, you take longer to reply. You choose when to visit and when not to. You stop explaining your choices because your peace doesn't require permission. Machiavelli would not advise a dramatic exit. He'd tell you to fade slowly, methodically, without declaration. Let them think you're busy. Let them wonder if they did something. Let the silence do what words never could. Narcissists fear distance because it interrupts their control. It forces them to feel their own emptiness. That's why they'll bait you. They'll use memories, guilt, obligation, even kindness to reel you back. But you do not owe them proximity just because you share blood. Biology is not a contract. And love without boundaries is not love. It's a transaction. Distance allows you to see the shape of the manipulation. It gives you room to breathe your own air, to hear your own voice without the noise of their expectations. It teaches you the difference between guilt and grief. Guilt says you are abandoning them. Grief says you are letting go of something that never truly held you. Let that grief come. Let it ache. And then let it teach you who you are when you are no longer edited by fear. You are not being cruel. You are being clean. You are choosing peace over performance. You are no longer asking if they'll understand. You're asking if your nervous system can survive another year of pretending. And the answer is no. So you step back, quietly. Intentionally, you build a life they don't know about. a joy they can't control, a version of yourself that does not exist to soothe their emptiness. And that, more than any confrontation, is your escape. Every reaction you give them is a page in the story they want to tell about you. In a narcissistic family, you are not a person, you are a reflection, a character in their performance. And the moment you show anger, sadness, or even joy that doesn't serve their script, they'll twist it until you're the villain. They will provoke, nudge, insult with a smile, bring up the past with surgical precision, not to understand you, but to extract a reaction they can weaponize. Because when you react, they get to say, "See, this is why we can't trust you. This is why you're the problem." They've rehearsed this. They know your triggers. They know exactly how to press until you break, then lean back and pretend to be confused by your outburst. The more you react, the more you reinforce the identity they've assigned you: unstable, emotional, overdramatic. It is a game designed to make you feel both guilty and powerless. But Machiavelli would tell you this: the one who controls the reaction controls the frame. You must stop playing their game, not with silence that simmers into resentment, but with strategic stillness. Start by noticing the bait, the comments designed to sting, the comparisons, the rewriting of events. See it, acknowledge it internally, and then do nothing. No defense, no correction, no outrage. Let the silence speak. Let your calm become a wall they can't climb. This isn't about bottling emotion. It's about choosing where it is safe to be fully human. They do not deserve access to your reactions, if those reactions will only be used to cage you. So you give them nothing. Not coldness, but neutrality. You smile when you want to scream. You excuse yourself when they escalate. You keep your voice level when they try to rile you up. You rob them of the satisfaction of seeing you unravel. At first, it will drive them mad. They'll escalate, desperate to get the old version of you back, the one they could manipulate, predict, provoke. But if you hold steady, they begin to lose grip, because you're no longer supplying the fuel. You've stopped being the mirror, and without your reactions, their story loses power. This is the beginning of emotional freedom, not loud, not dramatic, but deliberate. You are not becoming passive. You are becoming selective. You are conserving your fire for places where it can burn something clean. You are no longer explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You are watching them panic in the absence of your chaos. And in that panic, you'll see the truth: they never wanted connection. They wanted control. And you, by not reacting, just took it back. You don't need to expose them with speeches. You don't need to gather witnesses, build your case, or write a manifesto about what they did to you. In a narcissistic family, words are easily twisted, and truth becomes a maze with no exit. They will rewrite the story before you finish telling it. They will deny, deflect, and smile while doing it. That's why exposure doesn't come from confrontation, it comes from stillness, from the quiet refusal to play your part, from the sudden absence of apology, explanation, or panic. It comes when you stop reacting, stop correcting, stop trying to make them understand, because understanding was never the goal. Control was. And once you stop feeding that machine, something terrifying happens. They begin to expose themselves. They get louder, more erratic, more desperate. The calm you hold becomes a mirror they cannot stand to look into. They will try to provoke you, just to confirm the version of you they've been feeding others. They want you to snap, to cry, to scream, so they can say, "See, this is what I've been dealing with." So instead, you stay still, measured, unshaken. You offer no excess emotion, no confession to twist. You smile without warmth, nod without agreement. You let their chaos echo into silence. Machiavelli knew the power of the unsaid. He understood that a single pause can reveal more than 100 accusations. Your silence becomes a performance of its own one they cannot script. And those watching from the sidelines, the ones who were never sure what to believe, will begin to notice. They'll see who escalates, who spins, who needs the room to bend to their version of events, and who doesn't. That contrast is the real exposure. It doesn't happen in one moment. It builds. Over time, your calm becomes proof, not just of their volatility, but of your transformation. You are no longer the child who begged to be understood. You are the adult who refuses to be performed on, and in your stillness, you draw a line that no one sees but everyone feels. They may call you cold. Let them. They may say you've changed. Let them. Those are the words people use when you stop making yourself smaller for their comfort. You are not passive. You are precise. You are no longer speaking to be heard. You are watching them reveal themselves to a world that finally sees what you've always known. Not because you said it, but because you didn't have to. You will be called selfish, cold, unforgiving. They will say you're running from your responsibilities, breaking the family apart, abandoning people who loved you. But escape was never going to look graceful. Narcissistic families are built on performance, and you walking away ruins the show. They don't want your presence, they want your obedience. So when you begin to leave, even quietly, it's seen as violence. Not because you've done harm, but because you've stopped offering yourself as a prop. Leaving without apology is a revolution, and like all revolutions, it will be punished by those who depended on your silence. You may be tempted to explain, to write a letter, to try one last time to be understood. But understand this, they already heard you. They just needed you confused long enough to stay. Machiavelli would tell you that power is not won through justification, but through decisive action. You don't beg tyrants to treat you better. You dismantle the system by exiting it, and that begins with walking away not in rage, not in grief, but in strategy. You stop answering every message. You say no without guilt. You remove yourself from gatherings that make you sick with anticipation. You go grey. You vanish a little at a time. You become less visible, less available, until one day they realize they no longer know who you are or where you went. That is not cruelty. That is survival. There is no perfect goodbye in a system that never let you say hello as your real self. There is no clean break when you were raised to be the glue. What you're leaving behind is not a family, but a role that was eating you alive. Expect backlash. Expect stories to be told about you. Expect the narrative to twist until you're the villain. Let it happen. Let them talk. While they spin tales, you're rebuilding a life with no audience. This is the part they never teach you, that freedom is lonely at first. You'll miss people who never really saw you. You'll ache for a version of home that only existed in your hopes. But that ache means you're healing. You are no longer numb. You are no longer folding yourself into something digestible. You are choosing a path that no longer needs applause to feel real. Walk. Do not run. Do not flinch. Do not explain. You do not need to be understood to be free. You only need to stay gone long enough to become someone they no longer recognize. Not because you've changed too much, but because you've finally become someone they never controlled. They always knew your name, but they never really knew you. In a narcissistic family, your identity is not yours, it's assigned. You are the quiet one, the troublemaker, the caretaker, the burden, the one who always gives in. And when you try to change, even slightly, they pull you back, not with ropes, but with stories. You've never been like that. That's not who you are. You're acting different lately. Of course you are. Because you finally stopped living in a version of yourself that existed only to make them comfortable. Building a private identity is not about secrets. It's about sovereignty. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself you were forced to suppress, the joy that made them jealous, the anger that made them defensive, the opinions that made them punish you. You don't have to announce your growth. In fact, don't. Machiavelli would never reveal power in progress. He would tell you to grow quietly, to become sharper in the shadows, to build a life so well defended that no one can find a weakness to exploit. This is the season of privacy. Not isolation, but intentional separation. You begin with simple decisions: what you wear, what you read, how you spend your time. Things they mocked or dismissed, you reclaim them. Maybe it's music you hid from them, dreams you buried, places you wanted to go but never said out loud. These small choices become bricks in the foundation of who you really are, not the version they sculpted from guilt and manipulation. And you don't owe updates. You don't have to post, explain, or defend. Not every part of your healing needs to be visible. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is change without witness. Because the family that once dictated your story will try to rewrite it the moment they realize they're no longer the main characters. Let them. While they guess, you're growing. While they spin theories, you're studying yourself. While they complain, you've become distant. You're becoming whole. And when they say you're hiding, remind yourself, no, I'm protecting. I'm building a version of myself you never got to meet because you wouldn't have let them exist. This is your private identity, unpolished, unfinished, and entirely your own. You don't owe them access. You don't owe them proof. You owe yourself the chance to exist without performance. And one day, they might see you again changed, unrecognizable, untouchable. Not because you disappeared, but because you finally appeared. Loyalty was never love in your family. It was leverage. They taught you to equate silence with loyalty, obedience with respect, sacrifice with virtue, but none of it was mutual. You gave everything and got conditions in return. And when you began to pull away, they didn't ask if you were okay. They asked why you were betraying them. That's because narcissistic families define loyalty as submission. You're loyal as long as you don't challenge the story, as long as you play your role, as long as you never ask to be seen outside the version they approved. But real loyalty, the kind that heals, begins when you start choosing people who don't need you to shrink in order to stay. Machiavelli understood the danger of false allies. He would say this: never place your survival in the hands of those who only see your usefulness. The family may call it betrayal, but what you are doing now is building alliances outside the bloodline, quietly, deliberately, not to replace what you lost, but to remind yourself what was never real. This is not about finding perfect people. It's about recognizing the difference between loyalty that controls and loyalty that protects. Look for the ones who don't need to be above you to walk beside you, the ones who don't get nervous when you grow, the ones who listen without twisting. They might not be loud, they might not be dramatic, but when you speak, they stay. When you fall silent, they don't punish you for disappearing. These are your people, now chosen, not inherited. And yes, it will feel strange at first. You'll want to explain yourself too much. You'll apologize for being too careful, too slow to trust. That's okay. You're learning a new language. You're unlearning the lie that love must hurt, that loyalty must cost you your peace. Real loyalty doesn't ask you to bleed. It just asks you to show up when you're ready, as you are, without masks. And you, too, will become someone worth being loyal to. Not because you save everyone, not because you sacrifice, but because you've made your peace sacred and your boundaries clear. You are no longer looking for approval in familiar pain. You are building something clean. You are choosing loyalty that doesn't feel like a leash. And slowly, your world begins to shift. The silence becomes safer. The love feels less like a test. You are not alone anymore, not in the way that used to hollow you out. You're alone like a castle is alone, strong, guarded, quiet, but not empty. They could read you like a script. One sigh, one hesitation, one flicker of your eyes, and they knew how to twist the knife. That's how they kept you in place. Predictability. You were trained to respond on cue, to flinch at the right moments, to explain before being asked. You thought it was empathy. It was surveillance. And the more they understood your rhythm, the easier it was to throw you off balance. In a narcissistic family, being readable means being vulnerable, not in the way that leads to intimacy, but in the way that makes you easier to break. So now, you must become unreadable, not fake, not cold, just unpredictable enough to be untouchable. Machiavelli knew that predictability breeds manipulation. He believed that to protect your power, you must never let anyone see your full hand. That doesn't mean lying, it means moving in silence. It means choosing stillness when they expect a reaction, humor when they expect tears, boundaries when they expect submission. It means not announcing your next step, just taking it. You don't owe them your rhythm. You don't owe them the map to your mind. If they knew how to use your softness as a weapon, then they have lost the right to witness your unfolding. Being unreadable doesn't mean being invisible. It means being sovereign. You walk into a room and speak only what is necessary. You reveal less and observe more. You let people misinterpret you without correction, because your energy no longer belongs to public consumption. And the more you practice this, the more your presence shifts. You become the question no one can quite answer, the person who no longer fits into their categories. You used to panic at that not being understood. Now, it's your freedom. Let them guess. Let them wonder why you're so calm, so distant, so peaceful in your own skin. That mystery is not detachment. It's protection. Because in your old world, being known meant being used. Now, being misunderstood means being safe. They can't control what they can't predict. And that unpredictability is power. Real power. The kind that doesn't beg, doesn't flinch, doesn't break, just because someone's disappointed. You're not cruel, you're careful. You're not hiding, you're choosing. And every choice to be less readable is a step away from the cage they built from your habits. You are no longer the echo of their expectations. You are the silence after the curtain falls, the space they cannot enter, the door that no longer opens just because they knocked. You were not broken. You were trained. From the beginning, every time you felt guilt for saying no, every time you softened your voice to avoid tension, every time you apologized just to keep the peace, that wasn't weakness. It was survival. You were taught to read danger in silence, to walk on eggshells before you could even speak. You became an expert in forecasting moods, absorbing blame, managing other people's chaos. And for a long time, you believed that made you flawed, but it made you skilled. Skilled in adaptation, skilled in emotional endurance, skilled in suppressing your truth so others could stay comfortable. What felt like brokenness was conditioning deep, careful, deliberate. You learn to flinch at your own needs, to second guess your memories, to confuse love with fear. That was the system. That was the design. And yet here you are, reading these words, untangling those roots, questioning the rules. That is not weakness. That is rebellion. Machiavelli would call it clarity, the cold, clear seeing of the system that trained you, the system that counted on your silence, your loyalty, your self-doubt, but you are no longer an apprentice in your own disappearance. You are now something else, entirely someone who notices the script and sets it down, someone who no longer performs at the cue of guilt or fear, someone who can see a cage and walk the other way, even when it's wrapped in tradition. Healing does not always look like softness. Sometimes it looks like distance, like a blocked number, like a quiet life that no one claps for, like disappearing from the roles they cast you in and appearing somewhere new, unannounced, unbothered, whole. You were trained to abandon yourself. Now you are unlearning, slowly, sharply, without apology. This is not a return to who you were before the damage. This is the becoming of someone who never again hands their power to people who only know how to spend it. You may still feel echoes of their voices in your head, the ones that call you selfish for protecting your peace, dramatic for setting a boundary, cruel for saying no. Let those voices speak and let them fade, because they are not you. They are relics of a system that tried to survive by making you small. But you are not small anymore. You are not broken. You are trained. And now, finally, you are the one rewriting the script, quietly, strategically, completely. If this spoke to something you've never had words for, you're not alone, and you're not powerless. Subscribe for more psychology that cuts through illusion. Comment, no more scripts, if you're done playing the role they gave you. And remember, silence can be strategy, but clarity is freedom.